Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Let's begin our look into Beowulf. We're in the classroom here, and let me put my coffee down. Important to remember about Beowulf and the selections we have. Of course, we don't have this reading. This is the text of Beowulf. You can see it's an actual book. But we just have selections, and they have been translated into contemporary English so we can read it. Reason being, Beowulf comes from what we call today Old English. For today's reader, you cannot read Old English unless you take a class, you take some training, then you can read it. It's pretty much unrecognizable. Where did this text come from? Right? Where did it come from, this Old English text? Of note, we don't have the complete text of Beowulf. There's passages missing. If you ever go through and read it, you'll see some ellipses in there, and we don't have the complete text, which, believe it or not, is par for the course with ancient texts. When we have a text from antiquity, it's rare for us to have the complete text. For example, Gilgamesh, right? Be another text from the ancient world. We don't have that full text. We just have to go with what we have. So where did this partial text come from? It's of critical importance to remember that this text comes to us from the oral tradition. What is the oral tradition? This is the time in human history when there was no printing press. We go further back than that. There was no such thing as writing everything down like we're obsessed with doing today. During the oral tradition, this takes place in what we could call our pre-modern past. And what happens is everything is passed around by word of mouth. What happened? People told stories, right? Yeah, people told stories. And then they would retell those stories again and again and again, right? Right. And what happens with these different retellings, there would naturally be changes with each retelling of the story. And that's just part of it. Today, right, what we call this myth, the wonderful world of myth. Of note, a lot of people, when they hear this word, they think of things like Bigfoot and crop circles and the Loch Ness Monster. That is not what myth means in the context of academic studies. In academia, myth refers to this, the oral tradition. When people would preserve and pass on knowledge through word of mouth. Why? Because there's no such thing as books back then. And this is something that in the 21st century that we really have a tough time getting our minds around, the idea that for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, there's no such thing as writing something down. You would remember it, and you would repeat it to someone else, and they would repeat it over and over and over and over again. Right? That's the oral tradition. So what these myths do is they capture important events, experiences in the form of stories. songs, poems. These myths lie beyond proof. Now, what does it mean to lie beyond proof? There's some things today that we can prove, right? Yeah, many things we can prove. Thusly, there's many things we can disprove. But it would be impossible for us to go back and say with any realm of certainty if Beowulf was a real person. Chances are there might have been a prince, right, or a king or a tribal ruler, could have been called Beowulf, could have done some great things. But what happened, right? Those events, they get turned into stories. They're retold. And what's important about this is where we get the idea of the hero. And we'll come back to this idea soon. This is where we get the idea of the hero and the importance of a hero to people during this time. And this idea of a hero, believe it or not, changes throughout history. In English and English literature, right, these people who would be going around as part of the oral tradition, telling and retelling these stories, are called scops, not scopes. There's no ES, S-C-O-P-E-S. These would be the people who would go around and retell these stories, these myths. And they would do it in the form of singing. So in other words, during the time, no one would sit down and read Beowulf because there was no such thing as a written copy of Beowulf. Instead, at the end of the day, they would sit around the fire in a great hall, and there would be a traveling scop who had just stopped in, and we would feed him, give him lodging, and as in repayment, he would sing the story of Beowulf, and it would be in Old English. Here's something that's really cool, y'all. If you've seen the Fellowship of the Ring, right? Chances are you have. And when Frodo and his friends go and they receive shelter from the elves after Gandalf's death, they're singing a song in tribute to Gandalf, and that song is in Old English, which is really cool. Peter Jackson did a good job. So if you say to yourself, I've never heard Old English, I never will, chances are you have. Okay, back to class. So this idea of the scops, this is what they would kind of do for a living. Now, mention that we would come back and talk more about the hero, and we're going to do that in the next lecture.